Brooks here in Los Angeles on Fancred. I'm glad you have joined me, and we got a lot to talk about, as always. Got a full show, as always. And we're going to talk about stuff today you're not going to get anywhere else. But what's funny about it is the stuff that we're going to talk about on this show today, everybody in social media is talking about, but nobody on the talk shows, on television or radio is mentioning, especially China. So essentially, this is the only place you can go every day just to get the information, just to let you know in a rundown what has actually happened, like what happened this morning. And I know most of you don't live on Twitter the way I do. That's my job, to get up at 2 a.m. and make sure I'm on top of this stuff. So we've documented all of it. Now, it's not going to be some boring timeline. It's all curated and analyzed for your enjoyment. So I'm going to be doing that starting in a second. But as usual, we are on the cutting edge when it comes to guests that are going to make news, break news. Yesterday, Representative Stokes-Berry from Washington told us he was the guy behind the California state law. It was his idea last January. Now, of course, his bill is stalled, ironically, at least for now. But today, we're going to talk to Representative Chris Welch from Illinois. And Chris Welch actually has a bill in the Illinois Assembly. And he's moving forward. He means business. And I wouldn't be surprised if this bill is submitted, I think, by the end of this month. And it's essentially the California bill. It's not going to start till 2023 if it passes. I think there's a good chance it will. We'll find out from him. We'll get the assessment from him. But what's really interesting about Representative Welch, former athlete at Northwestern, what I love about his approach is and he's been on WGN television and radio and 670 The Score in Chicago. This is like in the last 48 hours. So he is all over Chicago media as he joins us today. But one of his big points is this is all about recruiting for Illinois schools, right? We can't afford to be left behind. And we're talking about like the University of Illinois, Northwestern, his alma mater, right? A lot of college football schools and college basketball schools in the state of Illinois, right? But he has really drilled down on that point in the media he's been doing. He hasn't been shy about it. And I think that is the key to this whole situation, what's going to happen, understanding what's going to happen in the future, right? Now, and this is something we're going to talk about this. I'm throwing these things out. I'm going to ask him about, well, why don't we wait for a second on that, and I'll get to it with him rather than me throwing these things out and wasting time, because I'm just going to ask the question in a minute anyway. But also coming up on the show, John Walters, who's an old friend of mine and former Sports Illustrated writer, Newsweek. He has written for some of the biggest publications in the country, well-seasoned travel journalist in sports. Now with The Athletic, he writes this cool weekly column called Bubble Screen. If you got The Athletic or you're going to subscribe to The Athletic, you should, just for the Bubble Screen. It's an unbelievable, like an autopsy of college football over the weekend that he does with tweets and videos and analysis, and but mostly from the media, what they're doing, and off the field stuff, right? And so he's been doing it since the beginning of the year, and so we're going to talk to him about that, college football. He actually has a list out right now of what he thinks are potential game day sites for Saturday that he predicted, right, on his Twitter feed. And Florida LSU was number one. He nailed it. That's where game day is going to be. Of course, you've got the Red River. What do they call it now? It's not the shootout anymore in Dallas. They renamed it. They don't call it the shootout. Rivalry, Red River rivalry in Dallas. Exactly. Thank you, Cam Smith, our producer in Boston. But so John Walters is going to talk to us, and we haven't really gotten into the Sports Illustrated thing because I really don't have a whole lot of angst about it. You know, I think I addressed it, flitted over it, I believe, earlier this week at some point. But he worked there, and he knows a lot of people, and he was there a long time. And I don't think he's going to be, maybe he will be, but I don't think he's going to be shy about talking about it. Hopefully he won't be shy because we want to get the dirt on it, right? What the hell happened? Who's responsible? Where are the bodies buried? So we'll get into that with John Walters. That'll be later in the show. But our first guest is going to be Representative Welch, and we'll get him on the line here in a minute and drill down on what I was just talking about. But of course, I mean, I know the Dodgers game and the Nationals and everybody's talking about it. That's great. Fine. It's a game. Everybody's upset in LA. Everybody's happy in DC. People are watching it, screaming about it. That's fine. You can have an opinion. Great. But we're going to focus on what is the biggest story right now going at this moment. And we'll do that after we talk to Representative Welch, who's on the line with us from Illinois, joining us on Sports by Brooks on Fancred to talk about his bill in the Illinois Assembly. He has been awfully high profile lately. Thank you very much, Representative Welch, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Brooks.
And it looks like you're getting a lot of momentum in the state of Illinois with media. People are starting to pick this up, right?
Oh, yeah. Day by day, we're getting more sponsors. My colleagues are calling saying, hey, add me to that bill. That's a great bill. I'm probably doing a media appearance a day, just getting the word out. And we're building momentum towards the end of the month when the Illinois legislature returns for our annual veto session. Usually we deal with bills that the governor vetoed, but we're allowed to take up other legislation as well. And so we're right on the mark, and I'm hoping that we can get this thing passed because we got to keep Illinois on par with California.
Yeah, I've been really fascinated by your approach, and I've been studying all the states. Right now, by my count, there's about 17 states that are in play right now. But of course, you're really drilling down. You mean business because you've got a bill ready to go, whereas a lot of these states don't yet. But I'm interested in your approach in that you've talked a lot about recruiting, you know, as part of your talking points, I guess you could say, as it pertains to this bill. What do you mean by recruiting in the context of this bill?
Well, I mean, just that. I mean, California, if I'm a coach in California, the day Governor Newsom signed this bill, I am ecstatic. I'm running all across the country, and I'm using this as a recruiting tool. If you come to California, this is what the law of the land is in California, and you'll be allowed to do X, Y, and Z. You'll be able, as a collegiate athlete, be able to put some money in your pocket and start putting money away for down the road. That's a powerful recruiting tool. And, you know, for someone who lives here in Illinois, born and raised here in Illinois, graduated from Northwestern, played sports there, I want my schools here in Illinois to be on the same playing field with California. And half my baseball team, when I played at Northwestern, was from California. One of my best friends and teammates was Mark Loretta, current bench coach of the Cubs, and he's from California. You know, it'll be hard to recruit those top athletes like Loretta from California if California has that on the books and we don't. And so let's be honest about it. That's a powerful recruiting tool. And I think time is of the essence so that our coaches have the same abilities when they go into those living rooms.
Visiting with Representative Chris Welch of the Illinois State Assembly. He is proposing HB 3904 in that state, which would allow athletes to be compensated financially, very similar to the California bill. How similar is it, Representative Welch, to the California law that passed?
I did it on purpose. I followed that legislation very closely. I thought it was very artfully crafted. I think that bill as written addresses a lot of the opponent's concerns right out the gate. This is not a salary bill. It's not a university's, hey, you have to cough up money and pay. This is just about allowing athletes to do what's in their best interest, and that is profit off their own names, their own likeness, their own image. It also, I think, is with the effective date being 2023, it allows some important processes to take place. We know the NCAA has a bottomless pit of money, and they're probably going to sue, and it will allow that process to take place. But also, when you make a monumental change like this, you need to make sure the rulemaking process has time to get it right, and that we protect these student athletes as much as possible.
Now, you talked about the fact that it would be effective in 2023, just like the California law is. But you've got the state of Florida now. You've got a couple of bills down there, and one of them that was just filed, I guess it was last week, and we had the author of that bill on this show last week. That bill, if it goes through and it passes into law in the Florida legislature, would be effective in 2020, as early as next summer. So if that were to happen, would that be something that you might act on in Illinois to try to move up the start date of your law, your bill?
I have to tell you, I think a bill like that, the NCAA will probably be able to get an injunction from going into effect in 2020. They will be filing a lawsuit. Let's make no mistake about it. This is a billion-dollar corporation that's been built off the backs of student athletes for decades. They're going to fight. And I'm being realistic. I think the legislators in California, and that's why it passed unanimously, we're being realistic. 2023 is a good date. Any lawsuits should be resolved by then, and your rulemaking should be able to follow suit as well. I think 2020 is going to be real tough, and I think California is just going to end up spending a lot of money on legal fees right away. Florida.
You talked about being an athlete at Northwestern, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what played out at Northwestern couple of 3 years ago in terms of the union. And it seemed like they got really, really close, and it didn't happen. But what was your impression of what took place there? And do you think that is potentially something that could happen somewhere else down the road and be consummated?
Well, I think that the whole union issue at Northwestern was part of players' frustration that they're seeing all this money made by coaches, athletic directors, commissioners. They're seeing money made all around them, and they're not able to profit. They can see their friends on campus, like the music student, go on weekends and play in the local bar and make some money. And they're like, why can't we do it? And so I think that was just born out of frustration of what the students were seeing at the time. Whether that issue ever resurfaces again, I don't know. But I think this particular issue is so limited. It's so legally defined by what happened there in the Ninth Circuit and at the Supreme Court. I think that we're on solid ground here, and it probably will cause people to take another look at some of these other issues.
We're visiting with Representative Chris Welch of Illinois, and I always like to talk turkey and get right down to it. And you mentioned sponsors of the bill that you're continuing to tack on to this bill. But what are you looking at in terms of sponsors on this bill and the support that you're seeing?
Well, right now it's a bipartisan bill. We've got Democrats on the bill. We got Republicans. I'm getting calls every day. I got another call from a Republican leader today, right after I got off the Mully and Haw show, saying how much he liked the bill. He's going to continue to vet it and give me a call whether or not he's going to join on. I believe he will. But that's what's happening right now in Illinois, is that every day we're picking up more and more sponsors, and that's what happens with good legislation, and that's why I'm keeping it out there and educating people on the pros of the bill.
So, and I've talked about this with the representatives and state senators that we've had to this point on the show, but it's fascinating to see in every single state you have a different political climate and dynamic as you're trying to get these bills through the Senates, the House, the Assembly in those states. For instance, I'll give you an example. In the state of Minnesota, there's very much a underlying civil rights component that's being talked about with, of course, the vast majority of college football and basketball players being African American. But we haven't talked about that so far in your situation. Can you clue us in on what that dynamic is and what your approach is in Illinois?
Well, I think some things don't even need to be said because it's so, when you look at the coaches, when you look at the athletic directors, when you look at the commissioners, you're predominantly talking about white men. But we also know that the ones that are not getting paid, the student athletes, are predominantly African American. And so the race issue's out there. It's so out there, you don't really even need to talk about it. I mean, it's the obvious. And so, you know, we're going to talk about this bill on the merits of it. You don't want to get into issues that, you know, people can try to make it into something that is not. And so I think if we stick to the merits of the bill, people are going to also recognize other facts that can't be.
So what is our timetable now for the submission of the bill? Or what are you looking at specifically? And best case scenario, what could we expect maybe in the next few months?
So the way Illinois works with our veto session, we go back at the end of October for 3 days, and then we have a week in November for 3 days. We can, if this thing moves the way I'm hoping it will move, we can move it out of the House the first week of veto session and move it out of the Senate the second week of veto session, and the governor signs it mid-November.
Wow.
Ambitious, aren't we?
That's awesome. That's what I want to hear. That's why we're doing this. Yeah. So, well, stay in touch. We're going to be tracking what's going on in Illinois, and I can't thank you enough. And good luck with this, Representative Welch.
Hey, Brooks, thanks for having me on. You guys in California doing some good work.
We sure did. That's Representative Chris Welch of Illinois, and he's got a bill pending, and he's serious. 3904 is HB 3904 in the Illinois State Assembly. Yesterday, we had the guy, it turns out, who started it all, Representative Stokesbury in Washington. And I haven't even told you this, Cam. Cam Smith is our producer. Cam Smith is our producer.
Did you see that? You hear
in Boston. I can see it. It sounds fine. Everything's fine. Yeah, we got the big logo graphic there. That looks good. Beautiful. Nice job on that. But I wanted to let you know, Cam, and the audience know that it looks like we're going to have another state representative in the state of Pennsylvania.
See how it echoes?
Dan Miller, who is involved with the quest to get a law passed in Pennsylvania that would compensate athletes, and is very much based on the California law. But I want to shoot straight with you guys and let you know that this 2023 start date, for me, it's very difficult to accept, you know, when you're looking at the overall motivation of the people, at least in the state of California, because it kind of represents a painless process for politicians in getting publicity for this law. But now we've got to wait 3-4 years for it to go into effect. You know, I'm not so sure necessarily that litigation is the issue at this point. And I base that on, and I've said it on the show a million times, you probably heard it, I base that on the rhetoric from Mark Emmert, NCAA president, who's now suddenly sounding kind of resigned, saying we've got to, and I'm quoting him, we've got to evolve the rules. Coach K said earlier this week, and I'm quoting him, we must adapt, when he was asked about the future of rules in the NCAA, right? Those are signals. Those are signs that the NCAA is going to surrender. It's going to happen. But when the California law goes into effect in 2023, I'm not so sure that surrender is coming sooner than later. That's why I think what's happening with Chip LaMarca, and I've got a call into him from Florida, the state representative in Florida, who is putting the bill through the Florida state legislature as we speak. And that bill could be law next summer in the state of Florida. We talked to the guy who wrote the bill on the law, future law, Darren Heitner, on this show last week. We're going to try to get Chip LaMarca on to talk about Florida, because not only would that be huge if it passed into law in the state of Florida in 2020, but you're talking about an SEC school and an ACC school, right? Basketball, football, huge. California, same. 2023, non-starter for me. 2020 is where it's at. Now, is there a possibility we could get an injunction? Well, obviously, of course. But the sooner you force this issue, the better. And look, the great thing about what happened in California is it prompted action from people around the country who want their bill, their law, aimed squarely at 2020. And that's what I'm trying to scare out. That's what I'm trying to figure out as we do these interviews. And I'm not, believe me, I'm 100% behind Representative Welch, what he's doing. I'd much rather have him doing this than not. The one thing I will say about that, first of all, I love his honesty. Remember we talked about before he came on that it was about recruiting? And he said, let's be honest, let's be upfront. He wants to help the University of Illinois. He wants to help Pat Fitzgerald at his alma mater, Northwestern. It's a huge plus. And of course, those schools struggling, really struggling. And I'm not so sure it's going to get better with those coaches. Let's face it. I'm not so sure. Of course, you got Pat Fitzgerald, who was a media darling. So he's going to be given a lot of time. Northwestern, probably, you could set your watch to it. The most boring team in the most boring conference, the Big Ten. The Big Ten's unwatchable. Can't do it. Can't watch it. If you watch the Michigan-Iowa game last Saturday, just brutality. I think Iowa had 1 yard rushing. What's the payoff with the Big Ten? You're paying these guys all this money, this staff, these facilities, and they come out and do that. They can't, you can't entertain us. I'm looking at the AAC. I'm looking at SMU throwing the ball all over Mountain West. Big Ten. How long is this going to go? It's been going on since the beginning of time. I understand that. But can we make some good hiring decisions on staffs? I recognize it's like Mount Rushmore in the Big Ten. Kirk Ferentz has been at Iowa forever. Why? No idea. No idea. Mark D'Antonio. I went through this on Twitter over the weekend. What's the payoff with Mark D'Antonio? He's got the personality of an eggplant. And his program at Michigan State is a whistleblower magnet. Every 5 minutes, there's some new case coming up involving Michigan State, whether it's Nassar or Michigan State football. This has been going on forever because D'Antonio's been there forever. And it's the same old story every other year. Some Michigan State football player assaulted somebody on campus, committed a crime, whatever it was, and D'Antonio had signed off on this guy. The assistant coaches didn't want to recruit. That's the latest situation that's going on right now. Now is he going to be deposed? So I got off a little off track there, talking about the Big Ten. I just can't help it. It's just in the context of the athletes not being compensated, not getting health care in writing, no workers' comp. When you have in the Big Ten some state schools that have state employee unions at universities in the university system of those states. So if you work at one of the states that has a state employee union in the Big Ten at one of those schools,
I don't know,
and you are cleaning a toilet and you are a student making extra money, working at the cafeteria, whatever it may be, and you fall and bust your ass, well, you're covered in writing. Your health care is all taken care of, but not if you're a football player at that school, right? So in the context of that's where I'm coming from when I'm thinking about what Jim Harbaugh's making. And he hired his offensive coordinator who had no experience, in a 15-minute conversation with Nick Saban, right? Nick Saban. How do you think Maryland feels about Nick Saban right now with Mike Locksley? Boy, you couldn't see that coming, could you? That's a whole other story. How does Maryland just hand the keys to Locksley. Well, you know, he coached there. He's a great recruiter. He knows everybody there. He's from there, of course. And he works with Nick Saban and blah, blah, blah. Right. And how'd that go against Clemson since he was calling the plays against Clemson? He was. How'd that go when they finally played somebody? The point about Mike Locksley, if you don't know, at the University of Maryland is he was a head coach at the University of New Mexico. And I'm not saying that your gigantic mistakes should necessarily define you, but the program he ran at the University of New Mexico was a disaster on and off the field. Disaster. Speaking of New Mexico in that Locksley era when he was there, the athletic director at that time, Paul Krebs, is now on trial and may go to federal prison for embezzling money at the University of New Mexico at the same time Locksley was there. And what was Krebs doing? I should know because I covered this for my website. He was covering up for Locksley all kinds of crap that was going on that involved Locksley personally, off the field, on the field, alleged abuse of players, and, you know, I'm not sure. And 1 in 10, New Mexico was horrible. 0-11. So there was no payoff there. And so he goes and rehabs his image. And this is not a personal thing with Mike Locksley, but he goes to Alabama, right? And he's brought into Alabama. This is the current Maryland coach as an ace recruiter. And he is given the keys to the offense last season. And when Alabama went up against a team that was as good as they were, it was a joke. It was a disaster offensively. Meanwhile, Locksley wins the Jim Thorpe Award, which is the award for, I think it's the Jim. No, it's not. I forgot Cam, what's the award for the best assistant coach in the country in college football? Cam Smith, our producer, I'm sure he's going to come up with it in a second. I should know that. But Locksley wins that award, right? You think it's a coincidence he's with Nick Saban? The Frank Broyles Award, right? Let me clue you in on a little secret. The only guy who pimps his assistant coaches for jobs, head coaching jobs, things like that, like Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, great example right now, came out of Nick Saban's program. Kirby Smart, to Saban's credit, came out of Alabama and their program. But for every Kirby Smart, there's about 10 Jeremy Pruitts and Mike Locksleys, right? That is a documented fact. And so what I was going to tell you was probably the only person who promotes his assistant coaches for jobs more than Nick Saban does is Pete Carroll. When Pete Carroll was at USC, but now at Seattle, even today, he is a guy who is consumed with getting jobs for guys that have worked with him, for him, right? And is this just to help people? Not necessarily. It's to keep Pete Carroll relevant, just in case things go south in Seattle. It's a great strategy, but a little inside behind the scenes there for you when it comes to, you know, the behind the scenes machinations of college and pro coaching. I will say this. I mean, that is Carroll's reputation, and it is the worst kept secret in the media. Of course, you're not going to read about it, but you'll hear about it on this show, right? So, good Lord, did I get off track on that one, right? Well, we were talking about the Big Ten. I got off. Anytime Pat Fitzgerald's name comes up, it's over. It's over. I'm going to go on and on about the Big Ten. Then I'm going to jump over to Ferentz. Then I'm going to jump over to Mark D'Antonio. Then we end up somehow at Locksley's in the Big Ten now at Maryland. Nick Saban. But you get my point. This is all in the context of athletes not being compensated. One thing that Representative Welch, and I can't thank him enough for coming on, and we're all rooting for him, of course. But one thing I thought was really interesting in what he said was when I brought up the idea of, or at least the approach in which some of the politicians in other states are using civil rights to get momentum behind a college athlete compensation bill law, Representative Welch said, well, that kind of goes without saying, right? We all see that. We all recognize it. We all acknowledge it. So, and I mean, it's a weird situation. Of course, Representative Welch is African American too. And obviously, I can't speak for him, but it's interesting that you would have, I brought his name up before, Nolan West, and we're going to try to get him on the show from Minnesota. He's white. He's very conservative, and he has been accused of racism in Minnesota in the past publicly. And he is attempting to sponsor this similar bill in Minnesota, and he is using civil rights as a major component. And you don't want to be cynical here, but is he perhaps trying to rehab his image through this bill? Again, especially if you attach 2023 to it, well, that's kind of pain-free. You're not necessarily going to piss a lot of people off right away, get a lot of publicity, whatever it is. But getting back to the idea of, well, everybody already knows. You know what? And I should have done this while he was with me, but what's the point? Seriously, what's the point of having this conversation? I'm going to bring up right now. If everybody recognized what was going on, right, and acknowledged it, we wouldn't be talking about this bill and this law and this desperate attempt to somehow, some way get college athletes some compensation, right? This thing that we're talking about right now, I mean, this is costing the schools nothing. This is, now, it's a big deal because of the monstrous injustice for over a century and a half, right? But so I'm all for it. That's what it takes to break the dam, to start off. But the idea that we all see it, know it, acknowledge it, understand it, and it's related to civil rights and basic fairness, absolutely not. No, we don't. We absolutely don't acknowledge that. That's why those athletes are in the position they're in. And the vast majority of them being African American, not to mention enrollment figures at places like the University of Texas, University of Georgia, where you've got less than 5% of the student population at the University of Georgia who are African American males, whereas the football team is about 80% African Americans, right? And what's the percentage of non-athletes who are African American at the University of Georgia right now? How many of them are there? Less than 100, guaranteed, right? Now think about the demographic makeup of the state of Georgia, right? What is it, 40, 50% African American in the entire state? And less than 5% overall at the University of Georgia are African American males, and less than that are non-athletes. So that's going on right in front of everybody, right? This distortion of the reality of life, all for the sake of money. And the NCAA is the pretense for that, to get away with not compensating the players. That's the pretense, the NCAA. And we haven't had an NCAA violation that has caused a star player in college football or basketball to be ineligible in years. I put it out on Twitter the other day. I've got 80,000 followers, and a lot of, I would say most of them are college football fans. And it took a long time before anybody was able to come up with an, I mean, you got to be kidding me. It's a joke. You're talking about tens of thousands of college football and basketball players, and nobody is ineligible. There are no NCAA violations. There's no NCAA logo anywhere in the context of college football anymore. But we all see it. We all no, we don't. Absolutely not. That's the problem. And that's why, I mean, another great example. How many shows out there, national shows, worldwide shows like SportsbyBrooks on Fancred, are having people like Representative Welch, Representative Stokesbury. We're going to have, hopefully, Representative Dan Miller on next week from Pennsylvania, Chip LaMarca, Florida. Remember the house in Florida? How many people out there who are doing national talk shows are having those guys on? Zero. And I'm glad that John Walters is coming on the show later. He's going to be with us in the next hour, because as part of his weekly column on The Athletic, right, John Walters talked about the fact that all of the college football pregame shows, Big Noon on Fox and College Game Day on ESPN, you think about all the hours that they occupy on Saturdays, and the California law being passed. This was in the immediate aftermath. I don't know if it was this week. It was probably the week before, but he did write about it. And it wasn't mentioned at all. Zero. Nobody brought it up. None. No big deal, right? No, it's an earth-shattering, groundbreaking thing. At least if you listen to Mark Emmert, right? Lament it. He's devastated. Oh, it's an apocalypse. But we're not going to talk about it on ESPN or Big Noon on Fox with Urban Meyer. So that's why we're talking about it. And now you're going to be ahead of the game on what's going to have an earth-shattering impact on college football and college basketball. And the reason is what's happening in Florida. That's going to be the turning point, not California necessarily. Now, California was in the sense that it caused what's happening in Florida to take place. So California deserves credit. But where the rubber meets the road is going to take place in Florida. And if it looks right now, they're cooling their heels in the state of Alabama, right? I actually read a report last week that there is a state representative in Georgia who is looking to explore the possibility of a bill. And he had the unmitigated gall. I guess he missed the memo, didn't get the memo. Shh, we want the status quo in Georgia, right? We're on top right now. Don't do anything. Everything's fine, right? Just be quiet. Don't encourage the people in Florida. Don't encourage anybody nationally. Don't encourage the media to talk about it. For the love of God. Isn't it remarkable that the number one college football state in the country, Alabama, and nobody is talking about a law, right, where if it's passed in Florida, would give Florida a huge recruiting advantage over Alabama. Dan Mullen over Nick Saban. It would. To be able to say to a recruit, and you're Dan Mullen, we're going to get you paid. It's already set up. It's all good. Yeah. Just have to make an appearance once every 3 months at a car wash or whatever. But you're going to get paid, buddy. So come on down here. You know? Right. We're to believe that Alabama's not going to mobilize in about 2 milliseconds if that Florida thing looks like it's good. Of course they will. But, you know, what's funny is when that happens, whoa, it's a blindside. What happened? Now Alabama's involved. Now it becomes a big story. Now everybody's talking about it, right? Now all hell is breaking loose. Not in Alabama, because they're going to pass the most liberal version of this law that's going to give Nick Saban and whoever's coaching Auburn, because it's not going to be Gus Malzahn when they pass that law. Trust me, he's gone. He's done. Not going to happen for Gus Malzahn. But whoever that is there, they're going to have the ability to do whatever they want. They're going to have carte blanche. They already do, of course, but They're going to have carte blanche. It's going to be a race to see amongst the states who can give away the farm the fastest, right? And give the coach the ability to give players money above the table, not under the table, but above it. So this is Sports by Brooks on Fancred. My name is Brooks Melchior. We're in Los Angeles. Earlier today, we talked to a state representative in the state of Illinois, and he is fast-tracking a bill that he's trying to get passed, to his credit, to try to enact a law very similar to California to compensate athletes for their name, image, and likeness. That would take place beginning in 2023 if it's passed. And Representative Welch said could be passed into law by November. Great. Now, we're tracking other states. As I said before, we're going to talk to Pennsylvania, but I have calls out to everybody now. Spent all day, the last couple of days, canvassing all the states. I've located 17 states that have representatives, politicos inside, including 2 states where governors have come out in support of this law and think it would be a great idea for their state. Governor Walz in Minnesota and Governor Ducey in Arizona. Right? We should get them on. Get them on to talk about it. You notice, by the way, Representative Welch said to me when he was on with us, he's been on WGN, television and radio. He was on 670 The Score today. He's on with us all of a sudden. And because of those appearances, he's getting more sponsors attached to his bill. Now, coming in today, at least as of earlier this week, he had 1 Republican, 6 Democratic co-sponsors. He didn't get into the numbers with me because I don't think he's firmed up any absolute new commitments, but I think he's gotten feelers. Why? He's doing media. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to put the full damn court press on the NCAA. It's not even, why do I say that? Don't say that. Don't criticize the NCAA. Don't lament the NCAA. Don't even bring it up. Just stop. There's no point because the NCAA is the schools. There's no difference. It's not an extension. It's an appendage of the schools. Mark Emmert, and of course, who's really running things? Who's really in charge? A group of people, specifically the college presidents. And Mark Emmert is in that club. He's in that club room. You know, he's playing squash with those guys. He's walking around naked in the locker room, right? He's got a towel on with president of the University of Alabama, president of Ohio State, Michael Drake, Gordon Gee of West Virginia, all those guys, right? We have in this era of mercenary free agent presidents. Mark Emmert wrote the book on that at Colorado, Washington, LSU. And his mentor was Gordon Gee. Probably heard of him. Maybe you haven't. If you haven't, he is a guy who played a huge role in ushering in the idea of a mercenary university president. He's been everywhere that I know of. Vanderbilt, Ohio State twice, West Virginia. And I don't even know. I think he's at West Virginia right now. All over the place. Weirdo. I mean, I was at Ohio State when he was there in the 90s. Then he came back. He left to go to Vanderbilt. Then he came back. Well, that's Emmert's mentor. And so Emmert is representing those guys in the club room, in the city club. And yeah, and Cam Smith, our producer, tells me that West Virginia right now is where Gordon Gee is. But that's the constituency that he cares about. That's all that matters. So when he's talking, you know how the presidents feel to a certain extent. Of course, it's one big hedge now. It's one big hedge, and we read some of the comments that he made the other day in relation to this law. So I'm going on and on and on and on and on about this, but we have a perishable subject, a perishable topic that I want to get to because I want to give you some really juicy, interesting stuff about the NBA and what's going on in China. And of course, nobody's talking about it. So I got to get to it, right? Sports by Brooks on Fancred, do it every weekday, beginning at noon Eastern time. Nobody's talking about this stuff, certainly in the way that we're talking about it. But here's the thing. It's not that it's not interesting. That's BS. I'm not going to curse. That's BS. It's not that it's not interesting. It's fascinating. It's what's more interesting, Stephen A. Smith screaming and yelling, or what they do on FS1, or what they do on your local station? What do? Backwash the game from the night before. Give you my opinion. I have no information. Great. Everybody else is already doing it. Karen Smith sent me a note here, our producer in Boston. Gordon Gee allegedly had because he's a big bow tie guy, a bow tie budget of $250,000 when he was at Ohio State. Totally believe it. If you want to know where's all the money go, because college football generates more money than Major League Baseball and the NBA. Think about that. I mean, China, those sponsors and broadcasters in China provide over $1 billion a year in revenue to the NBA. It's so significant that a report came out from a guy with Yahoo Sports. I think his name is, where is it? Keith Smith. Sources told Yahoo Sports that some NBA teams are doing scenario planning for the $116 million salary cap for next season to drop by as much as 15% due to the situation between the NBA and China, right? So that's what the NBA has going for it, right? That's how much money it could possibly lose because of the fallout from what's happening in China. But college football makes more money. Where's it all go? You know where it goes? It goes into facilities to create shiny objects for recruits to sign on with the teams. And it goes into building programs, overbuilding. And I do mean overbuilding on these campuses, including renovations of the presidential mansions. And that's something that Gordon Gee perfected. Overbuilding, vanity projects, renovating his own freaking mansion. That's where the money goes. That's where the players' money goes that's being stolen from them, right? And this is the only place you're going to hear that. And I've studied it, well aware of it. So when it comes to this subject, good Lord, could I go on? My God. But I want to go back to the NBA in China because, I mean, it's a bizarre story. It's a bizarre, you know what it is? It's a bizarre story in the United States. That's what's bizarre, right? That the open letter that was sent by politicians yesterday that was bipartisan, that included, I think, AOC and Ted Cruz, I think, if I'm not mistaken. This, of course, I have all this prep for today, and I didn't include that. I need to take a look at it. But you've got this bipartisan open letter that has been sent to Adam Silver by politicians demanding that the NBA get out of China, right? And I'm thinking to myself, the NBA is the only American company in China? Are they sending this letter to Apple or Google or God knows all the other companies that have been in China forever? Yeah, Ted Cruz and AOC both signed this open letter to the NBA to get out of China. Did you hear what I just said? Did you hear what I just said? It's not so much that AOC and Cruz signed the same letter. It's what the letter was about. That's bizarre. And that tells you everything you need to know about the media backlash on the NBA right now. That we are so blinded by, I guess, I mean, I don't feel this way, our hatred of Adam Silver, NBA coaches like Popovich and Kerr, and the players that were sending them a letter, but not Apple? What the hell are you talking about? And they sent them this letter after Adam Silver had stood up to China and the government during his press conference the day before. The Chinese state-run media, in a statement, had demanded specifically an apology from Daryl Morey and Adam Silver. So Silver does a press conference. This is 2 days ago. All right. Of course, you haven't heard anything about this except for here. It's bizarre. So he does a press conference in Tokyo, and he is called on the carpet by a reporter from the South China Post, which I might add is owned by Brooklyn Nets owner Joe Tsai. He's called on the carpet by a reporter who says to Silver in this press conference, "Are you going to apologize?" Right? Nailing him to the floorboards. Not going to let him get out of the room without addressing, because, of course, the Chinese state-run media and the South China Post might as well be now. And Joe Tsai of the Brooklyn Nets is totally in bed with the Chinese government because he's also the owner of Alibaba. But okay, so that's when all hell broke loose. All the stuff that's gone on, tearing down the banners and no media and blackout in China. That's all because that day, 2 days ago, Adam Silver said, "I'm not apologizing. Pound sand. Sorry." So that actually is the footage that we have up right there is in Shenzhen, China, where the Lakers and the Nets are going to be playing Saturday. This is not over, folks. But that is outside the arena in Shenzhen, where Saturday the Lakers and the Nets are going to play. It's not going to be on television or streamed, and it wasn't supposed to be. But and I put this on my Twitter, and nobody else has it. I found it, and I looked at media reports, local media reports in Shenzhen, and everything is normal there. That actually, what you're just looking at was a parking lot outside the arena for Saturday night's game, and those are advertising promotional banners that are going to be put up. They're going to be installed. They're not being taken down. So essentially, China's now backing off. And I think things are going to go on as normal as they could, because as far as I know, the NBA is behind barring the media from talking to the players, right? Because now you're in a situation where you're dealing with a Stalinist regime. Up is down, right is wrong. So there's nothing you can say in the context of the situation with Hong Kong, China, or everything that's happened. If you're a player or a coach or Adam Silver, there's nothing you can say that's the right answer. And on top of that, what's happening here, I just told you about, it's just as bad. You've got a bipartisan open letter from Congress saying, get out of China. What? The day after you just stood up to China and stood up for freedom of expression of Daryl Morey, which is what he also did, along with not apologizing. And that's what caused the banners to come down and the blackout to occur, right? Of course, the game went on this morning. By the way, I haven't mentioned this. The game was played this morning, the Lakers and the Nets. It was sold out. It was actually sold out. It had been sold out for months, but everybody showed up. There were no masks. None of the fans were worried about it. Chinese, right? Sold out arena, played the game. Every time LeBron touched the ball, fans yelled and cheered, right? And outside the Lakers team hotel the last day or so, fans have been masked there. Nobody's covering up their face. There's no masks, right? Again, there's no Twitter in China. Half those people at least probably have no idea what Daryl, well, maybe they do, but what they understand of the situation came from the government. Right? But we're told that 1.4 billion Chinese are devastated. That's why we're doing these things to the NBA. That's why we're sanctioning them. And all the advertisers are leaving and we're going to pull them off the air because it's an organic movement. No, it isn't. 100% lie. Things have changed in China. This might be strange for you because it is for me. It has been the last few days. We're thinking, wow, China is this powerhouse economy. It's liberalized. It's not the way it used to be. I'm an old guy growing up in this. It's not like the 70s anymore. It's not Mao anymore. The problem with that is it is like the 70s now. It's changed. It's changed in China. Since 2012, Xi Jinping, the president of China, has rolled things back. He's a throwback. And now he runs private industry, the president of China, right? That's what's happening. So nothing escapes him or the government. And so with that in mind, Adam Silver right now, the NBA, they generate $1 billion a year from China. Every penny has to be signed off in some manner by the government. He's beholden. Now, it wasn't, people have talked about David Stern. Wow, what a genius. He got him into China. Yeah, he got him in before 2012 when all this crap wasn't happening. That's how the economy in China was built from the 70s up until Xi Jinping. That is the China that we see today. But he has frozen time. He's gone back in time. And so what's astonishing is that, I don't know, I'm assuming Adam Silver's he's well aware of that, right? But now we have this great example with Daryl Morey and the tweet and the response. And there really seems to be a disconnect, I think, with everybody, with reality. Why would China do this? Why would they be so upset? What possibly could cause them to go off the deep end like this? Well, first of all, they really haven't gone off the deep end, right? Well, it's an excellent propaganda opportunity if you're a dictator. And we see Xi Jinping in his suit. He doesn't look like the communist guy in the worker's outfit that we were used to seeing before, right? The irony is a lot of those guys of the past stayed out of private industry and let China grow into what it is today. But the guy in the suit is rolling things back. And so everything that's going on right now is being orchestrated by the government. And I'm reading, Darren Ravel had a tweet earlier today, right? After the game this morning, which went fine. Media blackout, Adam Silver's press conference, which was pre-scheduled for before the game, was canceled. But the game went on as planned. There was a sold-out crowd. The fans, you'd never know. You would never know. There were a couple of dozen fans outside and one had a sign that said F, but it's spelled out F Adam Silver. And of course, the CBS News correspondent who was there made sure everybody got a chance. That's fine. Made sure everybody got a chance to see it, but it was a very small number of people. All right. So we now know that the people of China are not up in arms. I mean, you could say, well, those are rich people. They're going to the game. It costs, maybe so. And maybe this is a class thing. And I'm not discounting the possibility, especially when you think about the rhetoric coming from the government, that there's not hundreds of millions, tens of millions of Chinese that are upset. I'm sure there probably are. And to a certain extent, I really can't blame them. And the reason is they turn on television and they see a lot of violence, vandalism, confrontations, physical, major problems going on in Hong Kong. But that situation is being totally misrepresented by the Chinese government and then our media, not just the Chinese state-run media. Our media is just reporting things at face value because they're reporting it like this is pre-2012. It's not. And it's not a separatist movement. It just isn't in Hong Kong. It's basic stuff. right? The most amazing part of the situation in Shanghai, where the Lakers and Nets have been over the past couple of days, is we did see cameras out in Shanghai filming NBA promotional stuff, signs, and things like that, where you saw Chinese citizens covering their faces. They didn't want to be associated with that stuff. They didn't want to be seen near it. Now think about that law. I already mentioned it yesterday. Hong Kong right now, those protests, the underlying protest is about extradition. To a certain extent, it's about all of the democratic principles that the Chinese mainland is trying to roll back. I get it. I understand that. But right now, the pragmatic issue is masks. The Chinese government, the mainland, is trying to ban them in public. And you look at the film of Chinese citizens in Shanghai trying to avoid the camera. Now you know why. Makes sense. That's what's going on. That's not what people in the United States are telling you. They're telling you the bad guy is Adam Silver. The bad guy is Steve Kerr. But I want to get to Darren Rovell's tweet. Darren tweeted earlier today, actually. His tweet, this is a very prominent member of the Twitterati, if you will. And his tweet is, and he's a sports business expert, right, who has been to Asia. So he tweets out, the Chinese took down the signs. Adam Silver called their bluff. Bet that game would still happen. Adam Silver bet that game would still happen. He didn't cancel it. The NBA didn't cancel the game. A full crowd. Silver comes away with the win in the most complex scenario any sports executive has ever had to deal with. Now, nobody likes to make proclamations more than Darren Rovell. You might say, well, Brooks, actually you do. No. Darren's the king. Yesterday, he came out and made the proclamation, or maybe it's 2 days ago, that this game's not going to be played today. It will be canceled. I'm making that prediction right now. And of course, he was dead flat wrong. And this was kind of a response to that. But remember what we talked about earlier. It's post 2012, right? So take that tweet and throw it in the trash. Adam Silver is just trying to survive. He's just trying to get out of China. He's trying to get through the game on Saturday with the least amount of egg on his face. That's it. Because he will always be beholden to China so long as Xi Jinping is president. Period. You cannot assess this situation in any other way, because this is North Korea. There's no difference. It's much bigger. I'm sure you can get away with a lot more. There's a lot more money, right? And it's dressed up nicely. And they had a decent track record before 2012. I don't know about that, but a better track record, at least in private industry. Human rights, I know. I'm fully aware, right? So you can't look at it in a vacuum. And somehow everybody is. And so what's the reason for that? Why are people lashing out? You know, you may or may not have heard about the statement Trump made yesterday, where somebody asked him, what do you think about the NBA in China, President Trump? Right. And so he answered the NBA China thing in about half a second. Well, that'll be fine. Now, what about Steve Kerr? Steve Kerr looks like a little boy who's shaking in his, and then he goes to Popovich. And it's just personal attacks on those guys. Those two coaches in the NBA have criticized Trump. Well documented. And not shy about it. And Steve Kerr begged off commenting on anything substantive, at least, involving the situation in China. And he deserves scorn, especially for the non-statement that he made. It was patronizing and disingenuous. Kerr, particularly his statement. So he deserves scorn for that, right? But of course, it turns into something that's like in a schoolyard where a fifth grader is going to say what the president said, whatever. What's funny about it is I was watching, I think it was CNBC. I'm almost positive it was CNBC. And how well do they know the president by now? So their big discussion all day is, and of course, this is something that's also not being covered, but you can bet is a factor in how China is operating in the context of the NBA right now, is this trade war between our two countries, right? And right now, Trump is absolutely universally regarded as being in a position of weakness with the Chinese government in these discussions, right? So they're covering that all day on Bloomberg and CNBC. They're not really covering the NBA stuff. They'll throw it in there once in a while. So they want to get Trump's comments about the Chinese trade negotiations yesterday. And this is when Trump was asked about the NBA, same presser. So they show you the footage of Trump commenting on the trade situation. And then someone brings up, what are your thoughts about the NBA in China? And Trump answers the first part, answers the question in half a second, and then launches into a personal attack on Kerr and Popovich. And the second he does that, CNBC cuts away. And there's no way in hell they're doing that to protect Kerr and Popovich. No way in hell. They just know what's about to happen. Who cares? He does it every day, nonstop. What difference does it make? I just started laughing when I saw it because I was like, wait a minute. Don't cut away from that, because I hadn't seen it yet. That was the first time these comments about Kerr and Popovich came out. The most predictable thing in the history of the world. We're going to now talk to John Walters, who is with The Athletic, writes a great column, weekly column. It's a must read if you're a college football fan. It's called Bubble Screen at The Athletic. I am a subscriber to The Athletic, and I read that every single freaking week. It's one of the best college football columns out there. And John, I can't thank you enough for joining me today, man. Thanks a lot for popping on. Can you hear me, John? Let's work with John on that, Cam, and see if we can get his audio up, and we'll get that rolling here in a second. So, man, my Twitter's going crazy. My Twitter has been going crazy the last 3 or 4 days. All kinds of new people and weird stuff and requests and things going on, right? People popping up in my feed that I hadn't seen before. Why? Because of the coverage that we're doing on this show. You're hearing about it, right? We're putting that on Twitter. We're putting the analysis on Twitter, but we're also putting videos and things on that on Twitter that we're going to be bringing to you here on Fancred. People at Fancred working their ass off to make things as good as possible, upgrade our situation. And so now we've got video going on. You saw some of it earlier today. We got graphics. Everything's happening. Audio, you name it. Right here, Sports by Brooks on Fancred, Monday through Friday, noon Eastern time. Hoping to visit with John Walters because I want to get his thoughts. We haven't talked about this at length on SI. I really wasn't all that into it, but I'm into it if I'm talking to John Walters because he knows everybody at SI. I'm not saying I don't want to put him on the spot here. He might be listening to me, but I want to know what he thinks. I haven't talked to him about it. So, that's a fascinating subject, I think, if you have people who are really informed on the subject, right? So when I left off on China, we were talking about Trump ripping into Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich. And the key takeaway for me was he accused them of pandering to China, which was patently false, right? It just was. And, of course, his response is all based on the criticism that he's gotten from Kerr and Popovich. And it really is sad to see media people using so-called legitimate media people using those comments. They're just blatant lies, misrepresenting Kerr and Popovich. Look, I understand why people would be upset about especially Kerr's non-comment. Popovich came out, if you're unaware, and back to the hilt Adam Silver, and his defiance of China on Tuesday in a Tokyo press conference, where he refused to apologize, mentioned it earlier, and defended Daryl Morey's right to freedom of expression, which caused a firestorm in China and produced what we had yesterday. And the possibility that game was going to be canceled, but it was played, right? But Popovich in no way was pandering. Now, Popovich also spiced in some shots at Trump. And you know what? To be quite honest with you, at this point, I understand where Greg's coming from. And by the way, Popovich is a veteran of the Air Force, if you don't know already. But he doesn't need to throw that stuff in when he's commenting about China, about Trump. And he threw some things in, veiled shots at Trump, didn't mention his by name. But to a certain extent, he has it coming to him. If you're going to do that kind of stuff and drag Trump into every single comment that's not about the NBA or basketball, at some point, dude, just give it a rest. It's like everybody knows. We do. We all know. So, hey, John, I appreciate you coming on with us. Thanks so much, man. I don't think we have John Cam, and so I think what we want to do is work with him to try to bring him back so we can get the
I'm here if you
technical
guys
side.
can hear me. I don't know if you can.
So what I would do here in this situation is let's see if can you hear me, John? Okay. What we're going to do is bring John back as we're already kind of deep into the show. But thank John for me, and I'll be in touch with him after the show. And hey, man, it happens once in a while. But I'm really happy that you're on the Fancred app, and you can comment. You can join me on the fan line. Click on the button on the screen as this show keeps going, as it's out there every day, right? More and more people are hopping on, watching the show, making comments, contributing to the discussion. And the type of people that we're getting that are viewers of this show are sophisticated sports aficionados, just like me. But so many of them come based on what's going on Twitter and on my feed. And so we're going to get a cut above. The discussion here, it's not, I hate that word, elite. It's not a bunch of elites with their nose up, right, who are in an ivory tower. Far from it. It's the opposite. But, I mean, to me, the world demands this show, has to have this show, when we have a bipartisan letter with AOC and Ted Cruz signing it, demanding the NBA get out of China, right? The day after Adam Silver actually finally does the right thing. Finally, right? And we're going to single them out. Listen, the fact that that happened, that is a product of the ignorant media propagating a disinformation campaign that is propaganda put out by the Chinese, period. Right? That's a big part of it. And of course, a lot of it is the animus, at least on the right, it's the animus stemming from Charlotte. And to a certain extent, in the context of what's happened in China, initially, it's understandable, right? It's understandable. So do you have the comment from Greg Popovich? Because I mentioned it before. Cam, see if you can bring that up. I mentioned the Greg Popovich comment, and I want you to hear this. And I want you to hear it if we're able to get it up. I want you to listen how he spices in the Trump stuff, but he doesn't mention him by name, which, by the way, that's just bad form. I mean, I know Greg is thinking to himself, well, people know I hate Trump, so they'll know what I'm talking about. But why do you have to put that in there? So when you place that in the context of, man baby, President Trump, just making up a lie about what Popovich said, he wasn't pandering to China. What do you think is going to happen when you do things like that? So we also have the Donald Trump stuff too. So, Cam, you just take it away. Put it up whenever you want to put it up, and we'll work.
Scared to be even. I mean, I watch this guy Steve Kerr, and he was like a little boy. He was so scared to be even answering the question. He couldn't answer the question. He was shaking. I don't know. He didn't know how to answer the question, and yet he'll talk about the United States very badly. I watched Popovich, sort of the same thing, but he didn't look quite as scared, actually. But they talk badly about the United States, but when it talks about China, they don't want to say anything bad. I thought it was pretty sad, actually. It'll be very interesting. Excuse me?
Are you okay then with the Chinese government pressuring the NBA over Hong Kong?
They have to work out their own situation. The NBA's, they know what they're doing. But I watched the way that, like, Kerr,
goes right back to it,
and some of the others were pandering to China, and yet to our own country, they don't. It's like they don't respect it. I said, what a difference. Isn't it sad? It's very sad. To me, it's very sad. John?
Mr. President, it's wrong to be.
Right, there you go. Now, based on, here's the thing. Cam, I want to ask you, maybe you were looking around on the media and saw what was going on. And I don't know if this was out there, but did anybody actually put back to back what Popovich said and compare it to Trump? They probably did somewhere. But, if you got the Popovich, go ahead and throw it up there and I'll shut up because I want people to see it. We are getting rolling here, man. We are a well-oiled machine working with video now and giving you a little insight into what I'm actually talking about, spouting off about. You're just going to have to take my word for it, right? Well, not anymore. Now we got video. Now we have proof. Citations of what I'm doing. So while we're working on the Popovich video, now you know what CNBC just cut out. And boy, were they right. Because he was actually asked about it twice, as you saw there. Initially, he was asked about China and the NBA, blows it off, and it just unloads on those guys. And then he's asked about it again, blows it off, right? It is what it is. It is what it is. But, when you look at that, I keep harping on this bipartisan letter demanding that the NBA get out of China. And what causes that to happen? Why is that happening? Do you have it? By the way, do you have the Popovich now? You can pop that up, Popovich, if you want.
Freedom of speech. I felt great. So he's been a heck of a leader in that respect and very courageous. And when you compare it to what we've had to live through the last 3 years, there's a big difference, big gap there, leadership-wise and courage-wise. And
right, save
it wasn't easy for him to say.
Just save it.
He said that in an environment fraught with possible economic peril.
Right.
But he sided with the principles that we all hold dearly, or most of us did, until the last 3 years. So I'm thrilled with what he said. And as I said, the courage and leadership displayed is off the charts by comparison. We've all talked about or heard about all the questions that all the talking heads have and everybody for the last 3 years. What kind of country do we want to be? Who are we? Where do we want to go? That sort of thing. Adam said something that helps you understand what direction you need to go in, rather than the cowardice of not being able to respond to something like the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. And there are many, many incidents like that where it's leadership and courage mean nothing. It's all about personal aggrandizement. So I was thrilled.
Now I'm shaking my head. The reason I'm shaking my head has nothing to do with Trump. Has nothing to do with the accuracy of what he's saying. He's being accurate, but the reason I'm shaking my head is, and the reason that people are so confused, right, why they would send that letter, AOC and Ted Cruz and the bipartisan politicians, the day after Adam Silver does something right. And the reason I'm shaking my head is the initial response of the NBA, in other words, Adam Silver, when the NBA put out a release after the firestorm that came out of the Chinese government, not from the Chinese people, following the initial Daryl Morey tweet, which started all of this, okay? The Daryl Morey tweet. After that came out, the Chinese government took it, put it on the China version of Twitter that they operate on Weibo, and then went crazy and said this is a direct threat to our sovereignty, blah, 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 right? The NBA's first attempt to control the damage came out in a press release shortly thereafter that, of course, was crafted by Adam Silver. And there were actually two. Now, this is like 4 days ago. This is the very beginning. This is why I'm shaking my head. Adam Silver, in his first response, right, he defends Daryl Morey yesterday, to his credit, and that's what Popovich is talking about. But at the beginning, he puts out two press releases, one for our benefit in English and one in Chinese. And the one in Chinese is different than the one in English. And I just don't mean by translation. I mean the content. And the content that went out to China was extremely deferential and extremely uncomplimentary of Daryl Morey and his tweet. Now, there was a total reversal, of course, on Tuesday at that press conference where Adam Silver defended Daryl Morey. Of course, he was standing up on a podium and everybody could see him and knew he was the one with the message, right? He was hiding behind a press release at the very beginning, and he sold Daryl Morey out. And that's what, in part, not in part, that's what really emboldened, I think, the Chinese to just go crazy with this propaganda opportunity. That the NBA bent at the knee, right? Kissed the ring, sided essentially with China, essentially said, we're sorry. It wasn't a direct apology, but it might as well have been, right? At the same time, Daryl Morey followed up that initial tweet with a deferential couple of tweets that were just a non-apology. It was just mumbo jumbo, parsed, all that stuff. I'm sorry if I got people upset, that kind of crap, but no apology. So when I'm watching Greg Popovich act like Adam Silver is morally superior to anyone, I don't care if it's Trump, anyone. Popovich knows, I would hope, what first came out and who authored that, which was essentially a capitulation, damage control, right? Cynicism, pragmatism. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. We're here in the United States. We've got all this technology. We've got social media. People don't miss any. Just look at my timeline. I don't miss anything. I've got two damn guys in a parking lot in Shenzhen, China, putting up advertising panels, for crying out loud, right? I'm telling you what's going on over there. I have the ability to find that. Anybody can. All you need is an internet connection. Just go to the library. So you're going to tell me that the NBA is going to put out two different press releases in content, one to China, one to America, and the Chinese version is essentially an apology, while the American version is this non-comment, not deferential, but not positive, not supportive. That's what the American version was, right? So now when you think about the letter that went out, I mean, I have read this all over the place. There's some very prominent people in the media. They've said this. I think this is the ultimate example of what I'm talking about, the problem. And the reason the letter went out and the reason that there's such a disconnect on this story, right, is that when the first Chinese version, with the deferential language came out, everyone in the United States who was in the media, who was paying attention and covering it, if they're going to write a column, because I read columns that have said this, but whatever came out of the time indicated it was an apology. And it basically was. I mean, Silver has said on Tuesday, I'm not apologizing. He was nailed to the floorboards by the media. They asked him, are you apologizing? I'm not apologizing. Well, you already did, basically, but it's all semantics now. He's dancing around. So that's what Greg Popovich is talking about. He makes him sound like the Marquis de Lafayette, doesn't he? Like he's, some heroic guy. And then he uses that to denigrate the president. Right? I feel probably the same way you feel about the president. Maybe we're different. Maybe you feel that Trump's, a hero. I don't. But it's totally unnecessary and inappropriate to bring up Adam Silver, right? And when you think about what's at stake there, what is actually at stake? Adam Silver is going to go back to his $1 million house or apartment, whatever it is. He's got $100 million in the bank. Everybody does, right? So what's really at stake? And nobody in China is going to get anywhere near him. The Chinese government probably protects those guys with the NBA teams and the front office and the officials better than they do their own government officials, right? So he makes it sound like it's this, he's somehow, imperiled in some way. He's not, right? There's a lot of money at stake, right? But the people who are involved already got a lot of money. So Popovich really puts you in a bad spot there because the president is making shit up, making lies up, and I want to be on Greg Popovich's side, but he makes it basically impossible by distorting the situation knowingly. And so it's that first apology that came out that caused the media to jump on Silver, jump on the media, and then James Harden came out of the Rockets and he apologized. He didn't say what he was apologizing for, but then there was video of that. So those two things took place. And that is what has fueled the animus you're seeing now. And now it's too little too late. And that's why you have a media blackout. Or, the Chinese are blacking the media out, I guess. Right? But if you're the NBA, if you're Silver and you're the players and the coaches over there right now, look, how outspoken is LeBron James? He's as outspoken as an athlete as there is of right mind. He has said nothing. Zero. Right? Because, I don't know if he really recognizes it. Why would he? But you can't win. It doesn't matter what you say. It's going to be twisted for the purposes of the government, period. And the reason they're in that situation is Adam Silver put out a release that apologized, and then 2 days later came back and said, I'm not apologizing, screw you. That's why everything blew up. All of this in the context of somebody saying with the Houston Rockets, free Hong Kong, right? And of course, that plays right into the Chinese playbook of, oh yeah, they're trying to break away and be an independent country, which they're not. Nothing to do with it. I'm sure there's some people that feel that way, but that's the narrative the Chinese want to present to the people. When you think about that principle, right, pushing that narrative, and you get the fuel from Daryl Morey's tweet, which is perfect if you're the Chinese government, right? Portray it that way. And then you turn on the television and they're protesting in the streets and they're vandalizing and there's violence and there's all kinds of stuff going on right now in Hong Kong. And you're just a Chinese citizen seeing this, right? You can't blame them for being upset. So it is a little complicated. I recognize that, but I've laid it out to you. And it's just more than anything, in this situation, we haven't learned anything about the Chinese government, at least, because we already know how they operate. We know, for the most part, what they're going to do. We know what they're doing right now with the sponsorships being pulled. That's temporary. We're well aware of that. If you know anything about what's there right now, the president and people running at the top of they've been doing this since 2012. So this is not new. These scare tactics are not new. Forcing apologies are not. I mean, it's been going on in the last 6 months. There's been several companies who've been called on the carpet. Several. Tiffany comes to mind. Cathay Pacific comes to mind. Marriott had to apologize because of their portrayal of Hong Kong as this sort of independent entity, I guess in their literature or on their website, that in no way is an attempt to, threaten the sovereignty of China. That's not what that stuff's about. But that's basically what has caused all of these issues with other companies. And of course, nobody's talking about that. That's not part of it, which they should be. But what's really disconcerting, it's not anything about the Chinese government. It's about the media and the impact it has on our society, that people are so misguided, misinformed, unwilling to take the time to learn what's going on. And it takes like 5 minutes. I mean, it's a miracle what we have, the question and answer machine that is Google. That's what it is. It's a question machine. It's not hard to find out that since 2012, things have changed in China. And everything that's happening could not be more predictable, right? So, to a certain extent, it's understandable. I get it, the reaction with the Charlotte thing and the politics and the ripping Trump and the holier than thou, right? The high horse, absolutely. And now it's in the context of money. And of course, we've got the freedom part of it. We've got the oppressed people's part of it. It's a perfect storm. And you know what? The NBA deserves this. They deserve it. Adam Silver deserves what he's getting right now. This is a total embarrassment. But at the end of the day, it's not, as Darren Ravel was trying to point out, erroneously, it's not a win or a loss for the NBA. Right? Ultimately, because 99% of the stuff's going to be temporary, right? They're going to come back to America and the conditions in China are going to be the same. They're probably going to get everything back that they supposedly were going to lose, including guys like Klay Thompson, CJ McCollum, who have shoes. Their shoe contracts are with Chinese companies. Those Chinese companies, by the way, have come out and said in the last 48 hours, we're calling off the deals. And nobody's saying a word about it to Klay Thompson right now, the Warriors. Why not? Because it's BS, right? The one exception to that, though, I think is, but my point is, at the end of the day, you're still going to be beholden to the government and you're going to have to capitulate in some way, whether it's privately or publicly, right? So, but I don't know. It just sucks when you're following things along and you're just like, what? Why are you doing that? And of course, I guess I do have all the answers. I was going to say, I don't have all the answers, but I think I do actually in this case, at least compared to other people. The last thing I wanted to bring up was the situation with the Rockets. And I do think that there's a possibility. Now, you got Yao Ming of the Rockets. He's over in China. He's the president of that Chinese basketball league that's worth $2 billion. And teams from that Chinese basketball league are playing exhibitions against NBA teams. You had the Wizards last night. If you're unaware, the Wizards played one of the teams from the Chinese league at Capital One Arena in DC, and some signs that fans brought in that said free Hong Kong were confiscated. Isn't that nice? And they were confiscated. The video of this, and took place while the national anthem was playing. Perfect, right? The day after, less than 24 hours after, Adam Silver, as Greg Popovich pointed out, right, was heroic in defending the freedom of expression of Daryl Morey, right? And of course, Ted Leonsis, right, doesn't care apparently about that sort of thing. We have a policy, no political signs. Oh, what are political signs? We decide what that is. What the hell does that mean? Political sign. That could be anything. That's a catch-all. But when it comes to the Rockets situation, I mentioned the NBA sanctions. Those are all going to go away because you've got, they're just going to go away. But the Rockets, that might be different. That might be different, and they might be made an example until Daryl Morey formally apologizes. And how could that possibly happen? A private apology, it doesn't matter. The Chinese government, they don't care about that. It's got to be public. It's got to be a capitulation. I'm sorry. They got to figure something out, right? I think, to be honest, the exit strategy for the Rockets in this situation is going to be a departure of Daryl Morey from that franchise. And that's a huge deal. He is the face of that franchise. He is everything to that franchise. He is much more popular in Houston than the owner. But honestly, if they lose what they have in China, the Rockets, Tillman Fertitta, the owner of the Rockets, is going to lose $200 million off the value of a franchise he just paid $2 billion for. One of the big reasons he bought it was China. They're China's team. And I have a sneaking feeling, because the apology thing with Daryl Morey just keeps going in China. And I think it's going to continue after all of this supposedly blows over. And what's the resolution? Is Daryl Morey going to apologize? If you're the NBA, he can't apologize, right? At this point, he can't. So what are they going to do? If you're going to face this, if you're facing this financial catastrophe, I think that might take place. And I think we're going to see Daryl Morey slide out the back door. And if he goes somewhere else, it's not going to be portrayed in the context of, well, I don't know. What am I saying? I mean, because the Chinese, they want a pound of flesh here. And I actually think that, I mean, right now we're playing NBA games. We're going to play the game on Saturday. It's probably going to be a normal situation and everybody goes home. And that's after Adam Silver came out in public and defied China. But we're still playing the games. China did not cancel the game. We're going to play the next game. And I think as far as I know right now, everything's in flames. It's blowing up. But as far as I know, everything's fine. And everybody goes home. I don't think it's going to be a case of Adam Silver has to apologize. But I do think that we might see something involving the Rockets. That's something to follow. And if it happens, remember where you heard it. If it doesn't, let's forget. This is our own little secret. We'll forget about that. So we got a great show coming up tomorrow. We've got some more cool guests tomorrow. Doug Farrar of USA Today, who is definitely somebody to speak to what we're talking about right now from a political standpoint. He's really into that, but he's an NFL guy. So he's going to give us the NFL tomorrow. But and listen, I'm not talking politics. It has nothing to do with what we're talking. And I'm never just going to gratuitously talk about ever. Never. It has to be a complete intersection folded together where you can't avoid it. And that's what we're addressing here. So Doug Farrar's the guy who could speak to it, maybe, maybe not. But Mark Stein is also going to be with us tomorrow. Another big deal. One of the top NBA writers on earth. a guy plugged into the China situation, New York Times, basketball Hall of Famer, Mark Stein, basketball reporter for the New York Times. Going to be with us tomorrow, as is NFL guy Doug Farrar from USA Today. So you're going to want to come back. You're going to want to say, wait a minute, it's noon. It's afternoon. Oh, it's like 12:15. Get my phone out. Bring up that Fancred app. There he is. All right. What's going on in there? What's Brooks got brewing? What's he cooking up today? That's got to be the mentality now. All right. So that's going to do it for today. But check my Twitter account. Could be new developments for the show tomorrow. There usually always is, right? More guests, subjects, topics, stories, breaking or otherwise. Sports by Brooks on Twitter, right? And I want to thank Cam Smith. Great job incorporating new things into the show. We got the video, we got the graphics. You can see things are going well here on Fancred. So thanks to Cam out in Boston. And we'll be here tomorrow at noon Eastern time. And this is Brooks Melchior saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.